The illusion of choice is a thinly veiled dynamic that drives many single-player gaming experiences. And while many developers spend a lot of time trying to convince players that choice is real and authentic in their games, the truth more often is that choice is a superficial concept in gaming narrative. BioShock confronted this idea head-on, searing into our minds a innocuous three-word phrase with an unforgettable new meaning. Would you kindly? Of course, one of the most memorable moments in the game is the "Would you kindly" phrase and the reveal of how that's been motivating the player throughout the entire game. It's still, to me, one of the most classic kind of narrative moments in games in the past decade. What's interesting about that phrase is that it didn't always start like that. Can you tell us sort of about the evolution of sort of the the conditioning of the player? And there was once Excelsior was the phrase once.
Yeah, this is. I'm trying to recall some of this. So we had the idea, because we had the Andrew Ryan scene very early, and we knew sort of all the events that would happen. There were phrases before there was "Would you kindly." The notion existed and what it meant and what it was, but we didn't actually have the phrase "Would you kindly" until later. So we had a bunch of terms we threw in there. And like Excelsior was it for one point. That's probably comes from my Stan Lee fanboyism.
Was that like so throughout the game? It would have been like Excelsior.
Just randomly
There are some things when you're making games you just sort of throw in as like, we need
Sounds
something.
cool
We need
Why don't
something
you head
here.
over there, Excelsior?
And then it sits there for a year.
Right.
And then all of a sudden you kind of forget it's not good, right? And then until somebody comes along and says, dude.
Seriously?
Yeah.
What,
Or you meant
Excelsior?
it to be like a stub in. You never meant it
Yeah.
to actually gain traction, and then you're like, oh crap.
But that sense of some phrase or word being repeated throughout the game that you wouldn't really realize its meaning
Yes.
Until later, that was there very early on.
Yes, yeah. And the fact that you would have something that seemed like a non-thing and then came back at you like a freight train later on it was there from pretty early.
Sit, would you kindly? Stand, would you kindly? Run. Stop. Turn. A man chooses. A slave obeys.
So that phrase evolved, but talk about that, the sort of meta-narrative of, being in a game, thinking that you have a sense of choice and making these decisions, but then obviously realizing that the player ultimately didn't have choice or was conditioned in a way that they would react to that. That was, sort of a new idea for a game. Where did that come from on your side, kind of? Was there sort of a deeper sort of, meaning behind it?
No, look, I think I was always interested in the concept, whether it's, Oedipus, not to get too pointy-headed here, but Oedipus sort of thinking he has, I'm going to leave, this city and go to another city because there's been this prophecy about me and I'm going to avoid my fate and I'm in complete control, and then finding out he's not in control at all, to the Manchurian Candidate, which is a story I love about, somebody who you find out is just a puppet, living a life of a man, and Fight Club. I always love those kind of stories about who am I and what is my agency in this world, because look, we struggle. I think everybody struggles that. How much we really have control over, and how much is our boss, our parents or whatever telling us what to do. So that seemed like a natural thing for story, and because it came from movies, that idea a lot, and plays, I don't think it was there was a lot of, it hadn't been explored in games really, and games are particularly interesting because games...
Because you feel like you are interacting with choice,
And you're really being, most games, especially at the time, you're really just being railroaded down a corridor. It's very easy to underestimate gamers, and I think probably I did a little of my own underestimation there, that it would be a little too pointy-headed for people, but people seem to really engage, probably because it spoke to an experience they had, a struggle as a gamer they've always had, which is like, I want to control, but how much control do I really have in this game?
True. And Sean, I mean, it was also something that, was a great surprise when you played through the game, and I'm sure even for people on the team, did everyone know that when Ken was sort of doing it, or it was revealed as people played through it?
I think, at some point the entire team knew. It wasn't, it was something that was talked about with a smaller group before, it was brought to the entire team. Early on, when you heard the idea and you just kind of clicks, right? You're like, okay, like I totally get this.
Did
like,
people get it? I seem to remember people looking at me like I was like a lunatic.
Maybe not the specifics, and maybe it's the Excelsior, or maybe you're talking about the Excelsior time, but the idea that you don't really have choice, and exactly like you said, you played through how many video games, and everybody's game is going to end the same way. You're going to kill these people, you're going to pass through these checkpoints, and you think you have a choice, but ultimately the only real choice is stop playing the game. So the idea that we're kind of like taking that on resonated. Now the actual, like, is it Excelsior, or is it the Latin phrase I forgot, or if it's would you kindly?
See, here's how I remember it, and I could be, I could be wrong.
Yeah.
I can remember being so surprised by the outside reaction, because I remember the internal reaction being completely nobody connected or engaged to it. I mean, we worked on it.
Yeah.
And so I was kind of surprised by the outside reaction, because I kind of thought it was like, as I said, it's a bit academic, right?
Yeah.
And look, it also could be a function of...
We're playing it close to the vest.
I could be misremembering it, or it could also just be a function of nobody making the game had the experience of playing it through and getting to that moment.
Yeah, that's what I mean. Like, it was revealed to them in advance of really playing it, so it wasn't that surprise.
Yeah, they had seen it in all its really half-assed, development stages on the way.
Out of order.
Yeah, out of order and all that.
And it's not really something you can play test over an afternoon, because it takes a little while to get to that point.
You need to lack the knowledge about what the game is to be able to sort of have that experience all the way through. I know you guys have talked about the idea of Atlas, the voice actor changing, and it was, I guess, very important that you nailed that actor, right? And you trusted that actor until there was sort of the Fontaine reveal and sort of understanding that.
Yeah, trust was everything there, right? And so there was something about either the actor or the writing or the accent that just people immediately said, this guy's no good.
Right.
When the first Atlas we had, because you have to trust this guy, and if you don't, there's no trust, there's no punch in the gut. I think we've really focused on making him have personal stakes in the story as well. That he had his family trapped. Of course, it was all fiction, right? But he had skin in the game. He sort of spoke to you as a friend, and especially because the whole world was so hostile to you. I think it took a while to get that exactly right.
Listen, I've got a family. I need to get them out of here. But the splicers have cut me off from them. If you can reach them in Neptune's bounty, then maybe, just maybe... I know you must feel like the unluckiest man in the world right now, but you're the only hope I'll ever see my wife and child again.
Sean, what do you hope is the kind of lasting legacy of BioShock? 10 years hence, a lot of things you guys were doing, have sort of become common now, right? With upgrades and moral choices in games and whatnot. But it was really pioneering work a decade ago. When you reflect on it, what do you hope people remember the game for sort of pushing forward?
For me, it's telling a story with the medium, and how we used everything available to us to tell that story. We used the environment to set up the backstory of Rapture and really create a sense of space, which I think is vitally important to getting the players to trust that, to sit down and kind of like just be in the space and let these things happen. Even the radio logs, the rudimentary animation that we had at the time. I mean, we really sat down with the tools that we had and at our disposal and tried to tell a meaningful story. Maybe not meaningful, but something that would be memorable to people that they could take away and, like you said earlier, have that water cooler moment where they're excited enough to to talk about it after they put the controller down. So for me, I think the legacy is that it was a story well told.
For me, it was a sense of place, being like the Rapture's a real thing, even though it's not. You know, it's actually a very crude, you know, from the time, you know, a relatively crude bunch of polygons and texture maps. You know, it's only, the original game is only in 720, I think. And I played a lot of it when we were testing it on a 14-inch, like, you know, SD television. That it still felt like a sense of place in the music and the characters, that it's a real place. And I think that my memories of the BioShock games was that I take away that Rapture's a real place and Elizabeth's a real person. Those are the two sort of big things that stick with me with those two games. And that's sort of what I'll always, you know, carry forward with me in my life.
BioShock is, you know, it's a place, but as we saw with Infinite, I mean, it's an idea, and it's a sort of a type of game. I think a lot of people say, like, oh, this is a, you know, a type of experience. When you think about, you know, your career, where you guys want to go, I mean, that idea of those types of games, do you miss it now that you've sort of moved on to other things now, or do you feel like it's sort of, you've closed that chapter?
I mean, it's always a part of what you do. Like, System Shock 2 was a part of BioShock, but it wasn't System Shock 2. It was you know, you're growing past that and trying out new things. I think BioShock and BioShock Infinite, and even going back to SWAP 4, those will always be a part of my experience as a game developer and what we're trying to do with the medium. So I don't think it's something that you just draw a line and say, you know, we'll never return, because there's always lessons that you can learn and things that you bring with you to the next project that you're working on.
I don't think the new game is going to, like, people are not going to be surprised that this game is, new games from us. They're going to see a lot of what we had done before in terms of world building and aspects of storytelling. The goal is to sort of, you know, move away from the you really have no choice kind of thing, and that's a very, 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 very hard problem, which we spent years working on. But we're building upon a foundation of stuff we've done before, just trying to go in a different direction with it. But it's always going to be part of our DNA.
City where the artist would not fear the censor, where the scientist would not be bound by petty morality, where the great would not be constrained by the small. And with the sweat of your brow, Rapture can become your city as well.